Hi everyone, my name's Jordan and welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing an updated top 10 fantasy series. I did this when I first started my booktube last year and it was a little more loose, and I also have read so many good series since I filmed that video. I will link it down below, but keep in mind it is one of the first videos I filmed, so it's a little cringe and the production quality is just not as good. But I have kind of loosened the parameters I did on that video. On that video I said it was only going to be completed series, and that kind of restricted so much because there's so many unfinished series that are in my favorites. So with this list, I've kind of loosened those constraints some. There are incomplete series on here, but my rule is I must be up to date on it. So I must have read everything that is out. Some of these on here are completed series, but many of them are not. Also, that video was not ranked. It was just like a jumble of my favorite series. This one I have ranked, so we all love a good ranking. So with that, let's get into it. Coming in at number 10 is the Bloodsworn Saga by John Gwynne. This is John Gwynne's newest series. Only 2 books are out right now, The Shadow of the Gods and The Hunger of the Gods. The Shadow of the Gods I liked, but I felt like I was like not getting the hype as much as everyone else was. But when The Hunger of the Gods came out, I fell in love and I really enjoyed it. This is a Norse-inspired mythology story where the gods are these big mythical beasts and they are part of the story, and hence this big dragon on this stunning cover. So there are a lot of different POVs and coming from all different walks of life, and all of these people have their different motivations for what they're doing. Many of them, their paths cross, and the gods are kind of like awakening, and it's just everyone dealing with what that means in their life. There's a lot of like revenge plots and things like that. There's a lot of really impactful themes. John Gwynne writes really good battle scenes, and I'm really loving this series so far. So this is number 10. Coming in at number 9, I have the Alex Stern series by Leigh Bardugo, the first one being Ninth House. This is a series, there are 2 out right now, and the second one just came out, Hellbent, and I absolutely loved Hellbent. So this is a series that is set in Yale. It is like an urban fantasy paranormal story, and there are all these secret societies at Yale that deal with the dead in some way. And there is this house, the Ninth House, that is kind of like the police of these secret societies, making sure that they don't go too far with their rituals that they do. And Alex Stern is a woman who comes from a very rough background who can see ghosts. Most people besides her, like basically everyone else, the only way they can see ghosts is if they take this special potion that can be very dangerous to take, but she can just see them. And so she is brought into Yale, even though she is not a typical Yale student. She is brought in to be part of this Ninth House, and it's kind of like this dark story of her trying to fit in this world and in this community while dealing with, in this first book, there's like a murder mystery going on, as well as a lot of like really dark themes of addiction and drug use and sexual assault. Like there are a lot of trigger warnings in this, so keep an eye out for that. But this book is incredible, and Hellbent was also very good. Hellbent kind of expands the magic of the world a lot. You get some of it in this book, but in the second book you get a lot more in-depth into what this magic means and Alex Stern's powers. And it's just a really unique story, unlike anything I've ever read. It kind of has like dark academia vibes, but it also has like a lot of really tough themes. And Alex Stern is such a dark person who is just trying to survive, and what she does to survive is really hard to read at times, but is done really well. And I love these books. Coming in at number 8 is the Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. This is like a sci-fi fantasy futuristic kind of story. Every single one of the books in this trilogy won a Hugo Award, so like they're just amazing. So before I even get into it, I highly recommend you read this series. But this series is phenomenal. It follows 3 women at different stages of their lives as they live in this really dismal world where there are these seasons that come through that basically like wipe out most of humanity, and then humanity must restart and regrow. And there are these people called origines, I think that's how you pronounce it, who can manipulate earth, like the ground and stuff. They can manipulate the earth, but their powers can be very strong, and so they are monitored and controlled by the government so that they don't do anything wrong, I guess, but their monitoring and controlling is pretty dark. And so you follow 3 different women that are all origins at different points in their lives, and it is a really, really interesting story. And by the 3rd one, it gets way more like sci-fi heavy. This one feels definitely more fantasy, more dystopian, but by the 3rd one, it gets very sci-fi heavy. And there's just so many interesting themes discussed in these books. There are so many very, very interesting characters that make very hard decisions, and it is a phenomenal story. One I'm definitely going to reread soon because I read this like 2 years ago, and I have heard that the audiobooks are really good, so I think I'm going to try the audiobooks soon and do a reread because this series is just phenomenal, and the magic and the science involved are so interesting, and the characters I love so much, so I highly recommend this series. Coming in at number 7 is the Empire of the Wolf series by Richard Swan, the first one being The Justice of Kings. I just read The Tyranny of Faith, which comes out in February, and absolutely loved it. So I've actually read more than what is out at this point. But this series was a huge surprise for me. I've talked about it in a lot of other videos. I had gotten an arc and I had really no expectations for it, good or bad, and ended up loving it. This series follows this justice who goes basically town to town dealing out the Emperor's justice. And these justices all have their own powers that they can use to make people tell the truth, and they're part of this large empire that is basically like conquering all surrounding lands. And this justice and his 2 people that travel with him, one of them is like his taskman and the other one is like his scribe and stuff. They are in this small town where there has been a murder, and there's like this whole murder mystery going on, but there's also like religious unrest, and there is whisperings of things going on at the Capitol that are not great. So overall, it's a very politics heavy story. It starts out pretty small in this small town, and then the second book really expands the scope of the world and the magic, and the way it ended was absolutely wild, and I cannot believe I have to wait again for another one. But I really, really love this series, and I think that Richard Swan is doing a great job. And I'm pretty sure, I'm like 99% sure Justice of Kings was his debut novel, and that's just wild because this series is phenomenal. Next up, it was very hard for this series, to be this low on this list. But when you see what's ahead of it, you'll understand why, knowing my reading taste. But this whole list is just my favorites, obviously, so it was just hard to rank them in general. But coming in at number 6 is The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. This is Brandon Sanderson's large, humongous series within the Cosmere. There are 4 out right now. The 5th one is coming out, I believe, in 2024, and then there's going to be a long break, and then the last 5 will come out after that. And this is a humongous epic fantasy story that is so unique and so interesting. Brandon Sanderson is a master at hard magic systems, and the magic system in this story is phenomenal. He also is really good at tackling character arcs. Like, his characters all have very unique personalities and very interesting arcs. They all deal with different mental illnesses and different struggles in their lives, and he does a really good job of showcasing that. I always applaud Brandon Sanderson for how much he tries to make sure his characters are portrayed correctly. He uses so many beta readers, so many sensitivity readers to make sure that what he's writing is not offensive in any way or misleading in any way. There's a character with a very specific mental illness that kind of shows up in the mental illness itself, shows up in like the 2nd or 3rd book, and it is a very, very complex psyche she has, and Brandon Sanderson, I think, does a really great job of showing that, and this series is just so good. It's so complex, it's so expansive, the world is expansive, the characters you really love. Each book kind of focuses on one character while still being multi-POV. You kind of get like a dialed in on one character in each book, and I think they're all phenomenal. And I am so excited for the 5th book to come out. Also, I think I'm going to reread this series this year, towards the end of the year. My friend Alex over on Tall Guy Reads has never read them, and he hopes to read them this year. And so I said I would reread them with him because I have not read these in a few years. So I'm very excited to reread these, kind of get back in this world, especially now that I have more knowledge and background with the Cosmere as a whole, because I've read everything in the Cosmere except Elantris. So now I have a better understanding of the Cosmere. So I think rereading it, I will learn a lot. Coming in at number 5 is the Gentleman Bastard series by Scott Lynch, starting with The Lies of Locke Lamora. This series is absolutely phenomenal. Scott Lynch is one of the famous authors that has not released a book in a long time, but he was having a lot of mental health issues, and he has kept his readers kind of up to date with that, unlike some authors, Patrick Rothfuss. I love this series. It is about a group of orphans that are trained to be basically like white-collar criminals, and it's just like there's a bunch of heists, and there's beautiful friendships. It's one of the most beautiful friendships in fantasy, especially showcased in the 2nd book, and I just absolutely love these characters and the world, and the heists they go on are so smart and like so well thought out and so interesting, and I just think that the series is really unique in the fantasy genre, and it's also just extraordinarily well crafted, and I think about this book and these characters quite frequently. The 2nd book is my favorite, and you really get a whole lot of like Locke and Jean camaraderie and love, and it's just so well written, and I just love this series. It's so good. Definitely read it if you haven't. Coming in at number 4, the only books I don't own on this list, and that is the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. This is a phenomenal series that is like it's a fantasy series. It feels like urban fantasy, but it's not a real place, and it's incredibly good. Jade City and Jade War were very hyped books that I read before Jade Legacy came out, and I enjoyed them quite a bit, and I really liked Jade War, but I still was like not really getting all of the hype that everyone had for it. But then I got an arc of Jade Legacy and ate it up. It was phenomenal. One of the best endings to a series I've ever read, and it quickly grew to be one of my favorites. This series is kind of like a mobster gangster story where the Stone Jade grants these people in this country of Kekon magical powers, and there are these 2 warring clans that control the Jade in this country, and it gives them political powers, and it's just the story of these 2 battling families as they try to control all the Jade, control the government, and expand their empires. So it is a very expansive story with a lot of really unique characters and really interesting political machinations, and it is just a wonderfully crafted, well thought out series. And this is another series I'm like so excited to reread one day, because I'm sure I will like drink up so much more of it having read the whole thing. Jade Legacy, I was a puddle on the floor at the end of it. I was sobbing. It was so good. It was so well written, and Fonda Lee is a master. These books are phenomenal. Coming in at number 3, I know you were waiting, The Live Ship Traders Trilogy by Robin Hobb. First one being Ship of Magic. This is the 2nd series in the Realm of the Elderlings. I did not do the entire Realm of the Elderlings on this list because I'm not finished. I still have the Fitz and the Fool trilogy. So instead I broke it up. And so I have 2 Robin Hobb series on this list, but I'm sure in the future it will be condensed to just the Realm of the Elderlings. But my rule was I have to be caught up in a series to include it. So I broke it up into the series within the Realm of the Elderlings. But the Live Ship Traders trilogy is phenomenal. It leaves Fitz and Fitz's world and goes to a different area of this world, and it follows a bunch of people that have these live ships. All these trader families, well, not all of them. A lot of trader families have these live ships, which are created by Wizardwood, and when 3 successive generations die on the ship, 1 person from each generation die on the ship becomes quickened and basically is alive. And these ships are sturdier, stronger, and they can sail up in the rain wilds where the water is really toxic, and it is a really political, expansive story about this family and their live ship and who controls it and political unrest, and it is just phenomenal. The reveals were amazing. Plot was so well thought out. All of the characters, their growth from beginning to end was so masterfully done. Robin Hobb is a master of characters. Every character's arc ended in a way that felt very satisfying, and I just absolutely loved this trilogy so much. I think Robin Hobb does a phenomenal job of crafting this plot and these characters to get from point A to point B in such a beautiful way that is just unparalleled in fantasy. She does such a good job in this series. And this one is a multi-POV series. All of the Fitz books are first person told by Fitz. So it was really refreshing to kind of get a Robin Hobb multi-POV story, because you got that much more character development seeing it from everyone's point of view. So I loved this series so much. Coming in at number 2 is the Tawny Man Trilogy by Robin Hobb. This is the 3rd series in the Realm of the Elderlings. This one we get back to Fitz, and there's a big time jump from the end of the Farseer trilogy to this one. And so you're kind of like getting back with Fitz, seeing where he's been all this time, and how he gets wrapped back up in the Six Duchies politics. And this book specifically was very sad. But then at the end of the 3rd book, I was crying my eyes out. So this series was originally the last series in the Realm of the Elderlings, and you can really tell because at the end of Fool's Fate, it kind of wraps things up nicely. But there are still some open-ended things, which is, I think, why Robin Hobb went back and continued on. But this series was just chef's kiss phenomenal. Again, Robin Hobb is just so good at character, and we're back in this first-person POV with Fitz, and you get all of that growth that Fitz has gone through. You really see where he started and where he's come, and there's just so much growth in this book. I can't get into a lot of the details without spoiling things, since this is so much later in the series. But getting to see Fitz getting wrapped back up in the Six Duchies, and getting to see how what he did in the Farseer trilogy has consequences on his life even this far down the road is just so masterfully done. Robin Hobb, again, is just so good at tying up plot lines and tying up character arcs in such a beautiful way that feels right and feels warranted and feels satisfying. And I cannot praise Robin Hobb enough. If you've watched this far, you know what my number 1 is. And I always have a hard time comparing this to Robin Hobb because they're just completely different. And these are definitely, this series and Robin Hobb are like my favorite, obviously. And it's always really hard to choose between them because they're so different. But just going off of what I think of the most and what I interact with the most, it is The Locked Tomb by Tamsin Muir. This is the 3rd one because somebody is borrowing the first 2, but the first one is Gideon the Ninth, and this series is just something else. It is honestly so unique to anything I've ever read. I've literally never read anything like it, which is why it is so hard to compare to other books. This is a sci-fi fantasy story that starts with this woman named Gideon trying to escape this planet that she's lived on her entire life. And instead, Harrowhark Nonagesimus, who is the heir to this 9th house, this planet they are on, who is a necromancer, comes out and stops her and tells her she must be her cavalier as they go to the 1st house to train or compete to become lictors for God. And it is a funny, heartfelt, bizarre story that is very confusing and very well thought out. The first book, you don't see it as much, but then the second book, you have no idea what's going on for so long, and then the payoff at the end is just amazing. Like you're just jaw dropped for the entire payoff at the end. Tamsin Muir just does an incredible job of following all these plot threads and tying them together so beautifully and leaving some dangling so that you know that she's gonna approach it later. Like, there's just so much in these series. Every book is a very different tone and different characters, not completely different characters, but you are around different people for each book, and they're just so good. And she does such a good job of not giving you all the information and letting you kind of try to figure out what's going on. And it's just phenomenal. I have a whole video of why you should read the Locked Tomb series, which I will link down below. Check that out for all of my in-depth thoughts. And that is my updated top 10 fantasy series. Thank you guys for watching. If you could please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know down below If any of these are on your top 10 list, I would love to hear it. If you really like my content, please hit the notification bell to be notified every time I post new videos. As always, your support means the world to me, and until next time, thank you guys.